I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Sterling.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Hello and welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hello everyone.
Welcome to today's episode. We are looking at some content today that is so interesting, and I was saying to Kat off air, I reckon you could do an entire podcast series just on this one chapter. There's so many different parts to open up. So today we're moving into a chapter in Charles Taylor's book called The Age of Authenticity, and we're finally there. We're finally at the bit that makes sense to where we're living today. And hopefully, it's quite a familiar experience because I think we're living right in the midst of it. And we could talk about what authenticity is and how it's expressed in so many different spheres. But we might start with where Taylor takes us on the journey and then look a little bit at how we experience that for ourselves here. So the age of authenticity, we've kind of been leading up to it. We've been looking at, I guess, the impact of the world wars on people of faith and people in general and society, and kind of the impact that had on morality and people's sense of what was important, what was good, what to move towards. And we land in, the 50s, 60s, 70s, this post-war period of time. And one of the things going around in this time is that there's a post-war affluence. So we've moved beyond the Depression and the Second World War, and there's a bit of affluence around. People have a bit of money. And there's also, on account of that and the emergence of a whole new youth market, a bit of a consumer revolution that starts to take place.
Yeah, so can you imagine going from the 30s where nobody had any money, and then into the Second World War where you might have had money, but there was no stuff to buy with it because everything was rationed and absolutely everything was going towards the war effort, which cost a fortune. So probably people had no money as well as no things, largely. And suddenly you emerge victorious out of the war and things aren't such a big effort anymore. And probably there's a feeling of comparison sitting in people too. They've got more time, there's more things available for them, more money to go round. And it just starts shifting people's, not just lifestyles, but expectations from life. The expectation for years and years and years and years in human history was not what we would perceive today as normal, that teenagers would have time to enjoy life, or that young adults would expect that life is meant to be fun and that, I don't need to settle down yet. But when you're living in a relatively hand-to-mouth existence, which most people have for most of human history, there's not really time to waste or money to waste on being young and having fun. It's not like people didn't have fun, but the whole idea that we have of it now is very new.
Yes, and that's it. It's kind of, not that it wasn't a good, but it's a good that has increased in importance, that it's now one of the goals of life rather than an addition to life, in that kind of sense. And you were talking about teenagers. I mean, that's a new market that opens up because you've got young people with available income that are not yet married. That probably hasn't happened a whole bunch through human history. And so I call it the sneaker generation, where you could start to buy things that expressed who you were. Like a shoe was no longer just for its function of protecting your feet. A shoe was now a mode of expressing yourself. This is one of the things that starts to come out in a mass way, that to the masses, self-expression through fashion is now available, whereas before it might have just been for the elites. And in this period of time, as you were saying, Kat, that it's not that people were unhappy, but they have new ideas around what the pursuit of happiness in their life should look like. It's a time when things are really changing, and we see it come out, really strongly in the 60s into the 70s of my pursuit of happiness doesn't need to be bound by civic duty. My pursuit of happiness doesn't need to be bound by a need to be productive and be part of the system. My pursuit of happiness doesn't need to be limited by constraints of sexual morality. So all these things are starting to take off in this period.
And you have to say that there's something of advertising enters into this whole consumer mentality. Like it's actually played upon in us as well by people realizing they can make money out of this pursuit of happiness. And so suggesting to us what it is that will make us happy and arousing in us expectations and desires that have never have occurred to us in the past.
And again, we could do a whole podcast on the advertising industry and how it exists to create desires in us that weren't there before, because they wouldn't need to advertise if we were already going to walk into the shop and buy that thing that they're trying to get us to buy something that wasn't already the intention. Like there's so much in all of this. And one of the things that comes within this is that there's a shift in moral order. So the moral order talks about, I guess, the order of goods, like health is a good, prosperity is a good. These are the kinds of things we're talking about. And something that really starts to rise in this period of time in the post-war affluence is that people suddenly, for the first time in a long time, or because it was taken away from them in their youth, now have a sense of choice. And that choice starts to be, you can't take that away from me. Choice starts to take on a sovereignty. Taylor calls it the all-trumping argument. As soon as you say, that's my choice, it's like, how can you argue with that? You know, like, and we would resonate something like that. Like if I say, you know, that's what I'm choosing and someone says that's not an option, it kind of feels like, well, that's not really right. He says in somewhere else in this chapter that the sin which is not tolerated in this society, in this age of authenticity, the sin which is not tolerated is intolerance, that I have to leave people free to make their choice. You know, and very much operating under what he calls the harm principle. As long as my choice is not harming anyone else, then I need to be free to make it. So even if it's harming me, you can't intervene upon that. And we might have all kinds of arguments for all the loopholes for this, but we kind of get a sense that we're operating in, you know, like they're doing their thing, they're not hurting anyone, you know, like I don't have any right to intervene into that situation.
And again, you could spend a whole podcast just talking about the effects of this kind of soft relativism on our society and our faith and the way that we live today. There probably are whole podcasts on it.
Maybe when we get to the end of the book, we'll start picking back up all the threads that we want to explore further. I don't know what'll happen when we get to the end.
Contemplating authenticity and just
that'll be season 2, and I don't know what's going to happen, but. And one of the things that starts to happen in this period is, you know, there was certain rules, I guess, around, so the age before the age of authenticity that we've been talking about was the age of mobilization. So this is where all the people from, I guess, in a really brief summary, all the people from the country started mixing with the people in the city, and they were distanced from the whole background of belonging and the structures that held them in place. They move into the city and suddenly they're a little bit lost, but they're very mobilized by people that get them on board for a cause, or denominations that are like, come join us. So people have to be very active in making things happen, but anything's possible. You're not limited by previous things. And so there were certain rules that went alongside with that. And the same is then true for the age of authenticity. So some of the ethics of this age, we've already talked about choice. One of the things as well is that self-discovery becomes really important. It's no longer enough for me to let the world unfold, but I actually have to take some steps in discovering who I am, number one. Number two, it's then like part of my integrity as a human person to express what I discover. So I have to both discover who I am, but then express who I am. That's part of authenticity. And it's almost more helpful if that doesn't conform to what's in the world around me.
There's something about, like, in my expressing of my uniqueness, if what that is doesn't look unique, then maybe I haven't got there yet. Maybe I'm still conforming in some kind of way that I can't see. I'm not really expressing myself if I'm quite the same as everyone around me.
And he uses fascism as an example to talk about one of the things that defined the age of mobilization was common action, that people would get together and they would be doing that, they would be at the same rally for the same cause kind of thing. In the world of fashion, and what opens up in the age of authenticity, rather than common action, is this mode of mutual display. that we might be doing the same thing, but we're not doing it as a common action. We're doing it as a mutual display. So I'm expressing who I am to you, you're expressing who you are to me, and somehow there's an exchange there that's happening. That my self-expression is dependent upon you being there to receive that expression. And there's an interplay that happens there that would be so fascinating to spend, go on a deep dive into that we're not doing today. But that's the kind of thing. So this shift from common action to mutual display.
I know we're not doing a deep dive into it, but it's so true, don't you think? Like without really thinking about it, you meet someone in the street and you're already making assumptions about who they are, what they value, what their stance in life, etc., is by what they're wearing. I remember a very funny exchange between two sisters early last year where one of them was saying to the other, yeah, remember you were wearing your studious jumper? And the second sister was like, my what? You could just see all the assumptions that are sitting in that statement on both sides about what was being said about one sister's clothes. It was great.
Well, that's a great little segue, Kat, because I've worded you up and what I think would be awesome to explore some of the goals that go with this expressive revolution. So Taylor says there's two that are me focused and two that are we focused. So he says, me, I've got to self-express and I've got to have central release. And then we have to have equal relations. So this is like taking down hierarchies kind of thing. And we have to have a particular kind of social bonding within that. And I was thinking about how when I came into the sisters, I mean, self-expression, central release, equal relations, social bonding, these are kind of almost the opposite of what it's like stepping into religious life. And it's the ethic that I've been formed in. And yet, like I've freely used my choice to step into this. But there's a very particular tension between this ethic and some basic values of religious life or Christianity at large. And Taylor says this. He says this is the ideal package, these four goals, but there's no perfect iteration of it, that there's always going to be something compromised. And so I stepped into formation, and Kat, you were my formator. And I would love to know what it's like for you to go through that process. I mean, obviously, you've come through this age of authenticity as well. So you understand it and you've gone through the journey yourself, but now you're in a position of really non-equal relation. You're in some kind of leadership with people coming in who they might be older than you, they might have, different levels of education. There's all kinds of things, and they're coming in as a pre-novice, and it's your job to form them, knowing that some of this might be in conflict with what it is to be in religious life. So I want to look at those four goals of self-expression, central release, equal relations, social bonding, and then some of those ethics that come through as well. So the whole thing around choice, around self-discovery, and around being authentic. So what was it like for you, Kat? You spent 6 years as a formator and you did some study leading into that to, take take very raw, I guess, material of people formed in the age of authenticity and try and guide them through the tension to then joining religious life.
It was hard work, man. I think, first of all, there's a reason why they choose somebody who's a bit further on in religious life to form new people, because you have to have gone the journey yourself. And I think the most helpful thing for me when confronted by a whole bunch of people who I was supposed to be trying to help become true missionaries of God's love, but as a product of our age, uniquely themselves within that. I'm not sure that in the past the goal of religious life was to necessarily help the individual flourish as uniquely themselves. And I would say even that, some of the reading I've done would suggest that that's much newer thing, and maybe other religions might listen to this and go, we don't do that in our congregation.
Yeah, I mean, a really simple way is, I know I've read, stories of some of the saints that there's a sense that joining religious life was like a death to self.
Yeah.
And I experience, I guess, within at least the missionaries of God's love, I always talk about, I don't need to take on a new name because I'm continuing on as me. This is not me becoming a different person. This is a continuation of me, which is, as you said, quite different to some other religious congregations who have just a different mindset about that transition.
Yeah. And I think, let's be fair about all of this. Missionaries of God's love, we're not yet a religious congregation. We're working towards that. But we were founded and birthed in the church within the age of authenticity. So it's not an in the West. So it's not surprising really that the values and goals of this age of authenticity probably have shaped how we approach our living of religious life and even the goals within that. Like, you read books that were written last century by a Carmelite because there's this sense of, as an individual Carmelite, I shouldn't seek to stand out from the crowd. That kind of mindset where, we write books and you write it in your own name and we rejoice that the person's got that gift or whatever it is. But going back to that journey of forming people, I guess the thing that hit me first of all, as I struggled with how to walk this journey with people, was that experience that I had myself early on in my religious life journey in MGL, very early on, in fact. I reckon it was my first day in MGL, and it hit 9:30 at night, and suddenly everyone around me dropped everything and we started traipsing towards the chapel for night prayer. And on the scale between non-conformity and conformity, I would say I'm much closer to the conformity end of the scale, just naturally speaking. But I remember getting towards the chapel door, picking up my office book and having this horrified thought that I had made a choice that was meaning that for the rest of my life, at this time of night, I would be dropping everything and traipsing towards the chapel. And there was this sudden feeling of, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. I'm not sure that this is what I want. I'm not sure, like, I feel boxed in. I feel unfree.
It's not only, I'm not sure if I want this, I think there's also something that can go off in, I don't even know if this is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Am I just going through the motions here anyway? So there were all sorts of things. And I remember, I don't even know if it was in the moment or with time. I definitely have an answer for that now. But the answer that I have, that I came to in prayer, talking to God about it, really, was that what brought me to the missionaries of God's love and what keeps me within the missionaries of God's love is this deep conviction that this is God's call for my life. This is where he made me to flourish. You can hear the age of authenticity sitting in it. And that really comes out of my story. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is me, in that kind of crucial moment where I realized I was called to MGL. And I felt like God said in my heart, yes, this is where I made you to flourish. So like that conviction of this is the place where I'm going to flourish. This is God's choice for me. And I trust him as the one who knows me best of all. And if you like, in my response of love to him, I'm choosing to embrace the whole of what he's giving me in this package. Because if this is the place where I'm going to flourish, then all of the parts of this are what he's chosen for me as well, including down tools at 9:30 to say night prayer. So in those moments of, I really don't want to do this right now, that's what holds me. And that's what carries me forward. And I guess I took that into my experience as formator of walking with other people. And then we were talking before as well about spiritual direction and even people just in the Christian life. But let's stick to formation for the moment and within Missionaries of God's Love. That really now as vocations director, walking people with people in their discernment of a call to join MGL, what I'm looking for in them is that same sense of conviction of, yes, this is the place that God has made for me. And I'm going to take hold of it as a response of love, if you like, because it's deep in me that without that love, with the motivation, the everything that sits behind all of why you would live the way we live is missing.
So I guess what you're saying is, like, it's not uncommon, I guess, that someone would intellectualize their way that religious life is the thing that would be most pleasing to God, and so they should do the thing that would be most pleasing to God. You're saying like that's not going to hold you through, because in this, particularly more than any other time in this age of authenticity, you need to see yourself alive in the picture. You're not just like a robot filling out the function, or you're not a number moving through, but you as the person is so important, and you as a person is made by the God of love. And so there has to be love in the picture.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to, in an age of authenticity, be living authentically a response to love, because ultimately, love is what will drive you on in choosing the sacrifices of things that are so innate in us according to our culture.
I remember really early on, I don't think it was that mindset, but I remember, I think when you join religious life, you just have a lot of bravado or something going on for you. And you feel like you're some kind of hero coming in to, you know, change the world, save the world or something. And I remember feeling like there's a line in a prayer we say every day as missionaries of God's love, of being a missionary of God's love to all whom we meet. And I remember praying that prayer, just being like, that's my call, is to just, be a missionary of God's love to all whom we meet. And I'm doing that out of response of love to God. So love was in the picture. But the second part was that God spoke back to me, and then all of creation will be a missionary of my love to you. That
Wow.
it's also got to be, I guess, in religious life, the thing we're looking for is it's also a place where you're loved, and that love has to be an exchange, that the well will run dry if you're only doing it. Like, you can't live off that initial thing for the rest of your life. It has to be a place where you're able to be receiving love as well.
And so then within that mutual exchange of love, the rest begins to make sense. So I was thinking of that Pedro Arrupe quote, which is often thrown around. Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. What you're in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. I think there's something about that sits behind what I was really nurturing as a formator. I had to remain my focus as I walked with people. And I still do the same as a vocations director. I do the same in my own religious life, because like none of these things work or make sense if we're not grounded in love. Love is the only thing that can motivate the kind of sacrifice, that can motivate the kind of choices and the balance in it. So if you look at all of these things that you wanted to talk about, that the balance that we're trying to hold can only be held by love. Like if you think of just individual self-expression, for instance, like we were talking before about that sister and her jumper, you look at the missionaries of God's love and there's a sense of, conformity. We all wear brown skirts and white shirts. We all wear the same colored jumpers and the same pin on them. But we also leave a fair amount of freedom within a certain parameter, so that you and I are not wearing, I don't think we are anyway, not wearing the same brand of shirt, not wearing the same style of skirt. We've bought sandals at different shops. Our jumpers are different. And you can look at an individual sister, and sometimes you can tell stuff about the individual by the type of brown and whites that they wear. This person values looking good. This person values poverty. This person, and we're making sometimes unconscious judgments about each other and the way we, there's still a self-expression in the way we dress, unlike perhaps in other congregations where everything's exactly the same. But that self-expression has a limit, and the limit is around, there's a sense in which I'm also choosing to limit my self-expression in order to represent something else apart from myself to the world.
Tell me more about that, because I think that's the thing that people will often say, why, why would you choose something that is so against these, goals of the age of authenticity? Like, why would you choose something where that self-expression is taken away or limited? Like, why have any boundaries on that?
Well, I think when you're in love, you can't help wanting everyone to know you're beloved, right? If you hang around someone who's newly in love, they just can't help talking about the person that they're in love with. I've been doing some reading this year about St. Francis of Assisi, because he's obviously the saint of the year in the Catholic Church. It's the year dedicated to St. Francis. And G.K. Chesterton has a really beautiful reflection about him, where he says that the clue to the asceticism and the rest can be found in the stories of lovers when they seem to be rather like lunatics. We cannot even begin to see the sense of Francis's life until we understand that to this great mystic, his religion was not a thing like a theory, but a thing like a love affair. And I think, like, when I'm called to be a missionary of God's love, and that's coming out of a desire in my love for him that everyone else would know his love, and I'm going to give my whole life to that, then how I express myself doesn't just want to reflect something of me, but I want to express him to the world. And there's something about distinctive dress. And we've just been at a massive event that we were running. And I remember one of the young people at the microphone talking about, when you see that brown and white walk into a room, like that sense of we're distinctive by how we dress, but they don't look at brown and white and think, oh, that's KK or that's Kat. They first of all think there's a missionary of God's love. And for them, that says something. It's a statement to the world, and it speaks of him first, not about me as an individual. And as somebody who's fallen in love with Jesus and chosen to give myself to him as a missionary of God's love, that's actually what I want with my life. That I'm giving a portion, if you like, of my individual self-expression to express what the most important thing is in my life.
And you find that kids are often the first ones to pick it up. Like, you don't have to be with a kid very long and they'll be like, why are you wearing that? Why are you always wearing that? Like, if you're visiting a friend's house or something like that and their kid sees you the second time, like, you were wearing that last time. Like, why are you wearing that? What's that thing? Like, even toddlers obsessed with the cross. They might never have heard the name of Jesus, but they can see that there's something different about how you're choosing to present yourself to the world. And then it becomes exactly that opportunity to say, oh, actually, I know that I'm your mum's friend KK, but I'm also given to Jesus for the world.
It's quite interesting because I remember a particular sister. I used to have trouble with, you need to brush your hair, you need to have a clean skirt on, you need to make sure that you're tidy and on time when you're visiting people for pastoral visits, etc. And she was very much of but people accept me just and love me just for who I am and how I am. And I realized I was never going to get through to her until I could frame it in a different way. And it took some prayer and pondering. And I realized that, and it worked, talking to her about that, her appearance also expressed something of her love and regard for the other. That you are worth taking the time with my appearance, or you are worth being on time for. Like, I'm making an effort because that's making a statement about your dignity. And so the balancing of self-expression, again, coming out of not just love for God, but love for the other. And that knowing that as God's representative, because that's essentially what people see me as when I come to visit as in a pastoral situation, I am expressing something of God's love and esteem for the other by the way that I choose to approach. So again, it's coming back to, how do I find a way of expressing this that taps into our age of authenticity mindset, taps into an understanding of how we operate, but doesn't compromise on the value that we're trying to move into.
Yeah.
One of the, just moving on to another one of your categories here, one of the most obvious ways that we differ from the world around us would be sensual release. To step into religious life and a life of celibacy is obviously to step away from the fullness of sensual release in a really quite obvious way. And perhaps I want to be fair about this and say that although it's a struggle and a journey in making that final decision, I would say that most sisters, especially the ones who've stayed, would tell you that the biggest struggle in religious life is not this one, it's obedience. That's much more strongly and deeply in us in a way that we have to fight for. Keep coming back to, this is all about love, this is not about conformity or that kind of thing.
And I would say, I'd be tempted to say maybe that's stronger in an age of authenticity, except that we could go back to the garden and know that was the original first problem as well.
Yeah, obedience. Let's just shelve obedience for a moment and talk about sensual release and celibacy. And I feel like this is the easiest one to answer in a way too, but I think this is the one where the rest of the world gets our response wrong. There's even Taylor, I think sometimes reading him, gets some idea that, as a church, we've got hang-ups about sex, and therefore it's sort of something bad and something that, only the weak indulge in, and something like that. I just, that you get that vibe that, we think we're purer and higher somehow because we live celibacy. When in fact, I would say that it's the other way around, that very much, again, when I'm listening to someone discerning their vocation, I want to know that they value the good and the beautiful about sex and marriage. Because if they don't, I don't think that they've actually discerned yet that what we're doing here is not walking away from something that's bad or at best indifferent towards something that is better, but we're looking in the face of something that is good and beautiful and is a profound image of God's love in the world and can shape someone profoundly to image God's love in the world. And we're saying, Lord, for love of you and in response to your love, as a way of saying to the world, God's love is even better than this, even bigger than this, I am going to let go of this good. I'm going to choose to live without this good.
And for me, like a really clear image of that was your final vows day, actually, Kat, where you had a baby niece just born. And you're holding this baby niece. How old was she?
8 days old.
8 days old. And yet saying to the world, this is so good. And yet I found something that for me is a higher good.
And in a way, there's something profound because the world understands nonconformity and it understands that mutual display, that self-expression in a way, but they don't always read the message right.
I think the world would be more accepting of someone who had rejected marriage and become a spinster than a woman in religious life.
Well, this is true, and that's partially because they are conditioned to look down on religion as a childish approach and are running away from reality, if you like. But I think that there's something about the combination of the two, that being able to flourish as who I am and present to the world the joy of living the way that we do, that begs a question. And it does. We know it in our life and our mission. But the only way that you can remain within that joy is by remaining in love, by continually coming back to that focus. I'm coming back to St. Francis because I've been majoring in him this year, I think, in my reading. But like, here's a guy who died 800 years ago, and we're still captured by something of who he is. Like, he's still one of the best known saints that there is in the world. There's something about his person that attracts at the same time as repels. There's things about the way that he lived that repulse the ordinary individual. And I think Chesterton's right. When you look at it through the lens of this guy was passionately head over heels in love and did crazy things to express that love, he makes sense. But I think he's a great image for what we're called to do within this age of authenticity, which is to do crazy nonconformist things, self-expressive things with joy that attract people without them really realizing perhaps what they're attracted to. And so joy rather than pleasure, maybe as a goal within Missionaries of God's Love. Joy is something that we don't really have enshrined anywhere, but it's enshrined in a formator's notes. Is this person living with freedom and joy everywhere? Oh, looking for how's this person going? And I think it's that freedom and joy that witnesses the truth of the love that is attractive in the world around us. But it's, again, holding in balance two things usually.
So my last question for you is, you're journeying with someone into consecrated life. It's really easy from the Christian perspective to be able to see that good, to see it as the pursuit of the lover and being pursued by the lover. But you're also a spiritual director and you're dealing with a lot of people who are not journeying into consecrated life. And we've got a young man that I'm friends with at the moment. He's a bus driver. Now, in the age of authenticity, how does the garbage truck driver, the bus driver, the plumber, how do these fit into self-expression and all the things that we're talking about?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that bothers me occasionally, really, because I think about individual self-expression and I'm like, how does this apply to everyone? It doesn't seem to apply if you live in the third world. It doesn't seem to apply unless you're, over a certain income level and But I think that it's still pervasive in our society. And you use the example of a garbage truck driver. A few years back in our parish, there was a garbage truck driver who was baptized. He was Muslim, and he was evangelized by a fellow garbage truck driver who, in his living out of his faith, was so attractive just in the way he drove a garbage truck and reached out in love to, and he's a married man, there's nothing, he's not a priest or a religious, he's a married man, drives a garbage truck, but the way he does it and the way he is amongst his fellow garbage truck drivers so much witnessed to a fellow garbage truck driver, a Muslim, that he chose to let go of the faith that he was born into and be baptized as a Catholic.
That's amazing.
So I think, individual self-expression, I guess, we think of it as, I've got to have a job which is spiritually fulfilling and socially constructive and experientially diverse and emotionally enriching and self-esteem boosting and perpetually challenging and eternally edifying. Okay, so I stole those words from Taylor. But I think there's something more in individual self-expression than just that. And it's about the way that we live all the rest of our lives and the things we choose to do with our spare time and the way that we do the thing that we're doing. And as a spiritual director, when I'm journeying with somebody, there's a sense in which everybody's lives have limits, like our brown and white, or our dropping everything at 9:30 for night prayer or getting up at the same hour every morning. If you're married, you've got limits imposed on you by the very fact of your marriage and how you live married life. If you've got a particular job and that's the trajectory you're on in life and maybe you can't move out of it, then we're sort of respecting the limits of that, but within that, we're still seeking to meet the individual that God has created and open to the Holy Spirit, to God, in how this individual is called to be flourishing here and now. And that flourishing might not look like the fullness of sensual pleasure that the world around us thinks is flourishing. In fact, I want to propose that perhaps what we have to offer the world is the truth that the fullness of love, rather than the fullness of sensual pleasure, is what we should be seeking. And that in the fullness of love, we also find the fullness of joy. And joy is much more lasting and nourishing and satisfying than pleasure. And so when I'm walking with anybody, yes, individual self-expression is as much part of me being part of this culture as it is part of them, and we are seeking that, but within the accepted limitations. And so sometimes I will be helping someone discern a change of career or the possibilities of looking for a different path in life than what they're in. But sometimes that's just an accepted limitation on their life, and we're not really seeking out whether they should be a garbage truck driver or not. We're seeking who they're meant to be and how they're meant to live out that garbage truck driving as the unique individual that they've been called to be.
And I think for us, particularly as religious missionaries, that part of our message is always towards that, not that there's one way that is most holy, but actually in the age of authenticity, we're uniquely positioned to be able to help people to discover joy and fulfillment and what they're made for in even the most, what would seem mundane things, that even if the world would look at that as just a way to make money, that with the light of the gospel, as you said, every occupation and every life that has no occupation has so much richness and capacity for everything that we're made for.
And I guess that the thing about spiritual direction is that, it's not like I'm trying to do this all by myself. Really, what I'm doing is trying to tap into where is God in this person's life and where's God taking them. I'm really just encouraging and helping kind of clear someone's focus to be able to see that, and that God then is the one who is in his love for that individual, forging the path for them. And causing the life that he has planted in the world to flourish in the way that it was always intended to.
It's beautiful. So that's probably a good place for us to land today. And maybe it's even just for each of us listening to, maybe it's even just for each of you listening, just to think about where that joy is in the simple moments, in where you are, because that's, the light of the gospel speaking right in, that no matter what the world would have to say about all the things you need to be doing, that there's richness right now in even the very simple things. We could keep talking about this for hours and hours. I think it's very engaging, but perhaps that's a good place to leave it for today. So thanks so much, Kat, for your insights. It's always a joy and a pleasure, and thanks for those listening.
Thank you. God bless everyone.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.